G'day guys! With the new Arks of Omen Secondaries, there's an interesting debate going online between Psychic Interrogation and Warp Ritual. So what I thought I'd do is share with you guys a video that I recorded a few weeks ago before Arks of Omen where I broke down these two secondaries. I was planning on releasing it later, but Arks of Omen has brought this forward and has changed the way these secondaries work. So what I wanted to do is share that video with you because it's still entirely relevant. The only changes really are the warp charge value required and requiring line of sight on Psychic Interrogation. Other than that, these two secondaries remain unchanged and both remain very strong choices for Chaos Space Marine players. So I wanted to talk about these two secondaries, break down why you might want to pick one over the other, and help you guys understand some of the best ways to select your secondaries pre-game and how to write your lists based around the secondaries that you have selected. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into the video. But before we do, I want to let you know that January is our first time we're doing a Patreon competition where we're giving away an Angron. So a 3D printed Angron model. He looks absolutely stunning. You can get this model by signing up to the Patreon. That automatically enters you into the draw, and it's a really cool, exciting way of getting ready for that World Eaters Codex when it drops. So with that being said, let's just jump straight into the video.
Look for the Blood God.
G'day guys! There's no doubt that one of the hardest parts about playing Chaos Space Marines is selecting your secondaries. Now I know this is all about to change with Arks of Omen coming up, however I've just had this conversation with a few people over in my Discord and I wanted to share that conversation with you so that you can potentially gain some information from it as well. And that is the conversation about how to pick your secondaries, and particularly Warp Ritual versus Psychic Interrogation. So they're the two that I'm going to be focusing on in this video. But the principles should carry across to any sort of decision when selecting your secondaries. So the first thing that I want to comment on secondary selection is that you should be making these decisions when writing your list. It shouldn't be deciding when you get to the table. So what I generally try to advise is when you're writing your list, come up with a few baseline secondaries, a few secondaries that you sort of want to try to build towards, and secondaries that you plan to take in most matchups. Now, obviously, you're not going to take the same secondaries in every single matchup because there will be some matchups where certain secondaries are better than others. So you've got to be flexible, but I generally try to build a few into the list so that this is my baseline plan. If all else fails, this is my fallback plan. I'll always be able to score decently with these. And then if an opportunity arises to do something better, I then pivot onto that. So for my Chaos Space Marine journey so far, I've pretty much gone with the same three as my sort of secondaries, and that has been Raise the Banners High, Warp Ritual, and then usually the Long War, or generally one of the killing ones, right? So it'll be like a No Prisoners or an Assassination or a Bring It Down, right? So generally what happens is when I get to the table, I know I'm taking Banners, I know I'm taking Warp Ritual, and then depending on what my opponent's bringing, if they give up a lot of Assassinate, I'll take that. If they give up a lot of No Prisoners, I'll take that. If they give up a lot of Bring It Down, I'll take that. And if they don't give up any of these things, I'll then take Long War because I know that I can get a consistent 9 to 12 points out of Long War. So that's my sort of advice when it comes to secondaries. Now you can adapt this however you want, but the idea is come up with a baseline of 3 secondaries that you can always fall back on, and then you build your list in order to achieve those. You know, there's been some games where I've been going, okay, I'm taking Alpha Legion to a tournament. I'll build my list to take behind enemy lines. And I'm like, cool, my plan is to run a lot of MSU units, you know, a lot of deep striking threats, that sort of stuff, and I'm going to plan to take behind enemy lines. Or it might be Night Lords are also really good at behind enemy lines. But you decide that when you're writing your list, and then you build the elements into your list to make sure that you achieve that. So that's the first really critical piece of advice when it comes to selecting secondaries. But then the next thing to that is, well, which secondaries do you select and how do you go about selecting them? So for this part, I'm going to talk specifically to the decision between Warp Ritual and Psychic Interrogation. Because obviously when you decide that this is going to be one of your baseline secondary selections, well, generally that means you're going to be including a couple of psychers in your list so that you've got the ability to do this and you've got redundancy, so if somebody kills your psyker, you can still achieve this secondary. But how do you decide between Psychic Interrogation and Warp Ritual? And why is it that I almost always take Warp Ritual? So there's a few things to consider here, and one of them is that Psychic Interrogation is really good in the way that you can get 15 victory points out of it, whereas Warp Ritual is capped at 12. So on face value, it seems like Psychic Interrogation would be the way to go because it has a higher ceiling. You can score more victory points out of it. However, I find with Psychic Interrogation, the challenge is, in order to get those 15 victory points, you have to cast it successfully every single turn of the game in order to get those 15 victory points. And if you want to get 12 victory points, you need to cast it successfully 4 times in the game. Whereas with Warp Ritual, you only need to cast it 3 times to get that 12 victory points. So it sort of comes down to whether or not you think you're going to be able to successfully cast it every single turn. And if you don't think you are, well then Warp Ritual becomes a much more attractive option. And with the prevalence of people's denial power in the form of other enemy psychers, in the form of stratagems that allow deniers, like the Khorne one, and there's a few other factions that have them, and also things like Sisters of Battle, where just every unit in their army can deny on a 6+ or a 5+, depending on what sacred order they take. There's a lot of armies out there that have really strong abilities to deny you, and if that's what you're going into, then the chances of you successfully casting it 5 times is quite low. And because with Warp Ritual you only need to cast it 3 times, but you're going to have potentially 5 opportunities to cast it, means that even if they do successfully deny you once or twice, you can still get maximum value out of that secondary. So it means that your opponent's going to be dedicating resources to trying to deny you, and even if they do successfully deny you, it is entirely likely that it'll be all in vain and that you'll max out that secondary anyway. So Warp Ritual, in my opinion, is very strong in that regard. And the other thing to consider is that with Psychic Interrogation, you need enemy characters to perform the psychic action. And that's something that you're giving your opponent agency on, because your opponent can go, oh cool, I'm going to put all my characters inside transports so you can't interrogate them. Or I'm going to put them in strategic reserves so you can't interrogate them there. Or maybe they're like a Blood Angels player and they go, cool, I'm just going to play hyper aggressively with all my characters so that they die early in the game, and that means in the later turns you're not going to be able to interrogate them. Either way, it feels bad, Giving your opponent the ability to dictate your ability to score an objective is never a good idea. Whereas the center of the board is always there. There's nothing your opponent can do about that. And as a Chaos Space Marine player, generally the center of the board is our favorite place to be. We control the center of the board really, really well. And if your opponent wants to try to stop you from controlling the center to try to deny you your Warp Ritual, that means they have to come to us. They have to come and fight us in the middle of the board, and that's exactly where Chaos Space Marines want them. One of the bigger disadvantages of the Chaos Space Marine faction is that it can be quite slow, and being slow means that your opponent can skirt around you, they can avoid you. Whereas if you're going, cool, I'm going to take Warp Ritual, and I'm going to move up here in the center of the board, and I'm going to sit there and flip you off, right? Now, your opponent's either going to have to just deal with that and let you max out your Warp Ritual, or they're going to have to come into the center of the board and try to fight you. So this is a huge advantage for the Chaos Space Marine player, so I highly recommend Warp Ritual based on that. Now, there are a few reasons why you might want to consider Psychic Interrogation, and it's never off the table. Like, for example, you can cast it from a defensive posture. You don't have to go out into the center of the table. So if you are playing an archetype that's not built around controlling the center, well, maybe Psychic Interrogation is better for you in that instance, because you can, from behind a ruin somewhere in your own deployment zone, you can just sit back, and if they're trying to throw their characters into the center of the table, Maybe you're playing in like an MSU style word bearers list where you're running like multiple units around the table and you're doing all this stuff and you're letting your opponent control the center because you're controlling the flanks or something like that. Well, if your opponent's going to try and control the center, chances are they're throwing characters into the center of the table. So from your own deployment zone, you can just sit back safely and do that Psychic Interrogation. So there's some lists that are going to want to build into that. And also the fact that with Psychic Interrogation, you generate command points, if you roll over their leadership after casting it. That's obviously very powerful as well and is not to be overlooked. Generating additional CP in a Cav Space Marine list is really good because we have some really powerful, expensive stratagems. This is also somewhat legion dependent. Some legions require CP more than others. Some of them will spend almost all of their command points during list riding, giving themselves warlord traits and relics. Some of them won't. So it's entirely dependent on your list in that situation. So these are all things that you need to consider when you're writing your list. When you're writing the list on the table, before you get on the table, you need to think about, okay, what secondaries do I want to take regularly? And if you decide, okay, I want to take Psychic Interrogation regularly, well then you need to make sure that you build your list in such a way that it's going to maximize your ability to score that secondary. And the same goes for Warp Ritual. So you need to, for example, one of the tricks with Warp Ritual, I find, is that you need to make sure you have a character that's able to get within 6 inches of the center of the table turn 1. Because you don't always have to do this, but ideally you want to start casting it from turn 1. Because if you can successfully cast it turns 1, 2, and 3, that means that turns 4 and 5, your Psyker is free to go do whatever they want to do. They can run around killing things, they can pivot from doing the psychic action into doing their psychic powers that they've, got. There's tons of things that you can do. So going in early is very, very strong. So I generally take either a Demon Prince with wings because he can get up there very fast, or you want to take a Sorcerer or something like that inside of a Rhino, because then he can disembark out 9 inches plus an advance, which is generally pretty much from anywhere on the in your deployment zone. You're going to be able to get onto that within that center of the objective, center of the table, and that's going to let you do your Warp Ritual. So there are a few tricks on what you can do in order to try to maximize your Warp Ritual and your Psychic Interrogation. And this is the sort of thought process that you should be going through with most of your secondaries, is before you sit down to write your list, you should be thinking about, well, what sort of game do I want to have? Do I want to have a very aggressive game where I'm trying to get as many units in my opponent's deployment zone as possible and just going aggressive as fuck, right? If that's what you're doing, well then you need to go, okay, cool, I'm going to build for behind enemy lines, and then what am I going to do? I'm going to take a bunch of units of a single Obliterator, because they're really, really good for behind enemy lines, because you can just drop them in behind your opponent, score those victory points. Whereas if you haven't decided what secondary you're taking, you're likely to go, I'm going to take 1 unit of 3 Obliterators because that's better for stratagem utility, it's better for, all sorts of things. But when you decide you're taking behind enemy lines, that then informs the way that you build your list. And you still play a hyper-aggressive game with it. It just means that that 1 unit of Obliterators is now counts as 3 units, which means that it's going to be scoring those behind enemy line points really easily. Other examples are, you might go, okay, cool, I want to play a game where I'm just everywhere. I'm just all over the board, like fighting on all fronts, So you might go, cool, I'm going to take engage on all fronts, but I'm going to make sure that I have a shit ton of little units of 5 possessed, little units of 5 chosen, a bunch of venom crawlers, a bunch of little, units of raptors, fast units that can get into those back quarters early, and I'm just going to flood the board with units, So deciding what secondaries you want to take is often primary. I think a lot of people do this backwards and they go, okay, I've written a list that I think is really, really cool, and then they look at it and go, oh, now what secondaries do I take? And they make this decision on the day when they're at the table and they're looking down the barrel of their opponent, and they realize, I have no secondaries. I have no strong options here. And that's because you failed in the list writing stage to build for this thing and prepare for it. And this is particularly relevant for Chaos Space Marine players, and it's a skill that we need to develop. Other factions don't necessarily have this challenge. You know, they have lots of strong secondary options, or they have several very obvious secondary options, like obviously your Necrons, your Sisters of Battle, those types of armies. They have very strong, obvious secondary options. So, and there are options that they can achieve pretty much no matter what army they bring. You know, pretty much no matter what build they run, the secondaries they're going to pick are probably going to be the same, and they're probably still going to score high on them. That's not a luxury that the Chaos Space Marine players have. We actually have to be very smart with the secondaries that we choose, and we need to make sure that we're choosing them in list writing and that we're building in the tools into our list to achieve them. We can't just bring a strong army and punch our opponent in the face with it. We actually need to build the secondaries into our list. So that's some general advice, as well as some specific advice on secondaries for the Chaos Space Marines. So I know all of this is about to change with Arks of Omen, but I just wanted to get this out now, because obviously there'll still be probably a couple more events across the world before Arks of Omen is implemented, right? So we've probably still got a month or maybe even 2, because obviously it won't be, you know, the second it comes out, it won't be implemented. There'll be a time for tournaments to, you know, give people list submission time and list writing time and, you know, rules cutoff dates and stuff. So we've probably got another 2 months worth of, you know, events that will be running at Nephilim. So yeah, I just thought I'd send this out there so that for those next 2 months, hopefully that gives you Chaos Space Marine players a little bit of a leg up, and also for the people playing other factions, it might be relevant for you as well. And you never know, this advice might carry over into the Arks of Omen. There might be some relevant stuff in here about secondary selection and list building that carries over. We don't know what the secondary is going to look like in this new season, so for now, I just wanted to share that with you guys. I hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, sign up to our Patreon, join our Discord server, and pick yourself up some sweet Blog for the Blood God merchandise, the t-shirts, we've got neoprene objective markers, we've got all kinds of crazy shit, so make sure to check them out. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.
Blog for the Blood God.
Alrighty guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe, smash that comment section full of content. Some of the conversations we have down there are absolutely fantastic, so keep that good work up. And again, if you'd like to go in the draw to win a 3D printed Angron in time for the World Eaters release next month, then check out our Patreon. You can sign up for as low as $4 a month, which is only $1 a week, which is practically nothing. But if enough people do that, then I'm going to be able to reduce my workload and potentially release more of these videos more frequently for you guys, as well as improve the quality of the content, the lighting, the microphones, all of this sort of stuff. Subscriptions to editing software all costs money. So all of the support that I receive on Patreon is greatly appreciated. With that being said, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not one, not two, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today.